Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku led the Avengers into a secret invasion war? Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The air in the Baltimore shipping yard tasted of rust and salt water, a grimy cocktail that clung to the back of Izuku Midoriya's throat. Below him, the labyrinth of stacked shipping containers, bathed in the sickly orange glow of the dock lights, was a perfect hunting ground. And they were the hunters. Status report. Sam Wilson's voice, calm and steady as ever, crackled in his ear. As Captain America, his tone was the bedrock upon which the team's morale was built. Izuku, perched precariously on the edge of a crane gantry nearly 200 feet up, scanned the battlefield below. His eyes, honed by years of obsessive observation, catalogued every detail. 3 a.m. Squads, 12 soldiers in total, clad in their signature yellow hazmat-esque armor. They were forming a defensive perimeter around a central container, one painted with a foreboding radiation trefoil. Inside that container was a quantum destabilizer, a device with a fancy name for a very simple, very catastrophic purpose: make a city block's worth of matter forget how to exist. Hold positions, Izuku murmured into his comms, his voice a low counterpoint to the howling wind. They're entrenched. Standard pincer formation won't work. They're expecting it. He could feel the familiar thrum of one for all coursing through his veins, a contained supernova begging for release. But this wasn't a fight to be won with a single, overwhelming punch. This was a chess match. Less talking, more smashing? Peter Parker's voice was a familiar, welcome spark of levity, though Izuku could hear the tension underneath. Spider-Man was a blur of red and blue, clinging to the underside of an adjacent crane, a spider in a web of steel. Negative, Spider-Man, Izuku replied, a faint smile touching his lips. He shifted his gaze. Bucky, you're at grid C4. You have a sideline on the 2 snipers on the warehouse roof. They're your priority. On my mark, not before. Acknowledged. Came the Winter Soldier's clipped, gravelly response. No wasted words. Just lethal efficiency. Wanda, Izuku continued, his eyes finding the faint, crimson shimmer of her energy signature coalescing in the shadows between 2 stacks of containers. The destabilizer is emitting a low-level quantum field. It's volatile. I need you to create a containment bubble around the target container the moment we engage. Prioritize stability over strength. We can't risk jostling it. A soft, melodic, understood, Izuku, was her only reply. In the 2 years since he'd arrived in this strange, new world, Izuku had learned that Wanda Maximoff's quiet affirmation was more potent than a dozen shouted battle cries. Cap, you're our distraction, Izuku said, finalizing the plan in his mind. Green lightning began to crackle around his body, tracing the lines of his hero costume, a design that still felt like a piece of his old home. Draw their fire to the east gate. Make them think it's a full frontal assault. Peter, you'll be on fire suppression and evac. The moment that bomb is armed, AIM soldiers become secondary. Get the device. Get out. So I'm the shiny hood ornament? My favorite job, Sam quipped, but Izuku could hear the unfurling of his vibranium wings through the calm. In position, the plan was set. It wasn't a commander's plan, full of bluster and grand pronouncements. It was an analyst's plan, a diagram of interlocking pieces, each Avenger a gear in a machine designed for maximum efficiency and minimum collateral damage. He wasn't Steve Rogers. He couldn't be. But he could be what the team needed him to be, their strategist. All stations, execute. The world exploded into controlled chaos. Captain America became a blur of red, white, and blue, his shield ricocheting off a steel wall with a deafening clang that drew the attention of half the AIM soldiers. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air where he had been a moment before. As they turned to face the Star-Spangled Man, 2 sharp cracks echoed from the distance. The snipers on the warehouse roof crumpled, their rifles clattering onto the gravel below. Bucky's work. Simultaneously, a wave of scarlet energy washed over the central container, forming a shimmering, translucent dome. Wanda's containment field was up. That was Izuku's cue. He pushed off the gantry, a green comet streaking through the night. He didn't aim for the soldiers. He aimed for the ground, landing with a ground-shaking impact that sent a spiderweb of cracks through the asphalt. Before the nearest soldiers could reorient, tendrils of crackling black energy erupted from his arms. Black Whip! The dark whips snaked out with a mind of their own, not to strike, but to disarm. They wrapped around plasma rifles, yanking them from the soldiers' hands and flinging them into a heap a safe distance away. 2 soldiers raised their arms to fire wrist-mounted blasters, but Black Whip was faster, wrapping around their limbs and binding them tight. Non-lethal. Efficient. Spider-Man now! Izuku yelled, ducking under a punch from a beefy AIM trooper and tapping him with just enough of one for all to send him sprawling, unconscious but unharmed. Peter swung into the fray, a whirlwind of motion. Coming in hot! Or sticky! You know what I mean! He shouted, firing off rapid succession web shots. Goopy white strands gummed up weapons, sealed visors, and bound soldiers to container walls. He moved like a ricocheting bullet, a constant, chattering distraction that sowed confusion. Suddenly, a high-pitched whine filled the air. A red light on the target container began to flash. They've armed it! Sam's voice was strained. 90 seconds on the clock. Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs. Danger sense, his newest and most volatile quirk, screamed in the back of his mind, a piercing siren of pure, undiluted threat. The quantum field inside Wanda's bubble was fluctuating wildly. Wanda, hold it steady! He grunted, kicking off the ground and launching himself towards the container. The destabilization is interfering with my focus. It's pushing back. Wanda's voice was tight with effort. The crimson dome flickered. The IM commander, a taller figure with gold trim on his suit, saw Izuku coming. He raised a heavy-duty plasma cannon. There was no time to dodge. Bucky! Izuku yelled. A glint of metal flashed in the darkness. Bucky's vibranium arm shot out, catching the barrel of the cannon and twisting it with a screech of tortured metal. The resulting blast went wide, carving a molten trench into the side of a nearby freighter. That was the opening. Izuku put more power into his legs, the green lightning intensifying. Detroit. Smash! He didn't hit the commander. He slammed his fist into the ground just in front of him. The shockwave was immense, a localized earthquake that buckled the asphalt and sent the commander and his 2 guards flying backward. Izuku landed beside the container, his hands pressing against Wanda's shimmering shield. He could feel the chaotic energy pulsing within. Peter landed beside him a second later. Panels locked with a quantum-entangled cryptokey. I can't brute force it in time, Peter said, his lenses widening as he analyzed the device's interface. Then we don't, Izuku said, his mind racing, processing a dozen failing scenarios. He could see it in his head, the energy bursting outward, the silence of erasure, the crater where a piece of Baltimore used to be. The ghosts of the vestiges whispered in his mind, not with words, but with feelings, urgency, caution, a sliver of an idea from the second user. Redirect. Don't contain. Wanda, on my mark, drop the field and reform it above us. A cone, pointed at the sky. Funnel it all upwards. Izuku commanded, planting his feet. Izuku, the feedback could kill you. Wanda's protest was laced with genuine fear. Trust me, he yelled, focusing all of One for All into his arms and chest. The energy felt like it was tearing him apart from the inside. Peter, get clear! Spider-Man didn't hesitate. He web-zipped away, shouting. You better not be vaporizing my best friend, Midoriya. Now, Wanda! The Scarlet Dome collapsed. For a terrifying split second, the raw quantum energy of the destabilizer washed over Izuku. It felt like being submerged in ice and fire at the same time. His danger sense shrieked, a physical pain behind his eyes. Then, just as he directed, Wanda's power snapped back into place, not as a bubble, but as a massive, crimson funnel rising into the night sky. The unstable energy, now free, surged upwards, following the path of least resistance. But it was too much, too fast. The funnel began to tear at the seams. Izuku took a deep breath, the air burning his lungs. He remembered his training with All Might, the endless lessons on output and control. It's not just about power. It's about imagination. He aimed his hands at the base of the energy beam. Delaware smash! Air Force! He flicked his fingers, unleashing not one, but a series of rapid-fire, concentrated air pressure blasts. They weren't meant to destroy. They were meant to guide. Like a shepherd herding a flock, the blasts created a vortex, tightening the quantum beam, reinforcing Wanda's funnel, and pushing the chaotic energy faster and higher into the upper atmosphere. The light was blinding. The sound was a deafening roar that vibrated in his bones. For 10 agonizing seconds, Izuku and Wanda were at the heart of a controlled apocalypse. He poured every ounce of his energy, his focus, into the task, his muscles screaming in protest. And then, as quickly as it began, it was over. The beam dissipated into the clouds. The high-pitched whine of the device died, replaced by the crackling of fried circuits. Silence descended upon the shipping yard, broken only by the groan of stressed metal and the distant wail of approaching sirens. Izuku's arms dropped to his sides, trembling violently. His vision swam with black spots. He staggered, and a pair of strong arms caught him before he could fall. One was human, the other was cold, smooth vibranium. Bucky and Sam. "Easy, kid," Sam said, his voice full of concern. "You're okay. We've got you." Izuku looked up, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Bucky was staring down at him, his usually stoic expression softened with something that looked remarkably like respect. Peter landed nearby, yanking off his mask to reveal a pale, worried face. Wanda drifted down to the ground, her own face etched with exhaustion but also relief. They had won. The city was safe. But as Izuku looked at the faces of his team, his friends, he felt the familiar, crushing weight of his responsibility settle back onto his shoulders. The quiet was here, but it never lasted long. The flight back to the Avengers compound in the Quinjet was subdued. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind the dull ache of strained muscles and frayed nerves. Peter was chattering away, trying to fill the silence with a technical breakdown of the destabilizer's failure points. But his usual manic energy was a half-octave lower than normal. Bucky sat in the corner, methodically cleaning his sidearm, a grounding ritual that Izuku had come to recognize as his way of decompressing. Wanda was gazing out of the viewport, her fingers tracing idle patterns of soft red light in the air, her mind seemingly miles away. Sam, having relinquished the pilot's seat to the autopilot, came and sat opposite Izuku. He had a medical kit open, dabbing a disinfecting wipe on a shallow cut on Izuku's cheek. "You have to stop using yourself as the final backstop, Izuku," Sam said, his voice low and serious. The Captain America tone was gone, replaced by the concern of a friend. "There's a fine line between brave and reckless, and you tap dance on it." Izuku offered a weak, tired smile. "It was the most logical option. The probability of success for any other course of action dropped below 40% once the timer was activated." Sam sighed, shaking his head. "See? That's what I'm talking about. You calculate the risk to yourself like you're a disposable asset? You're not. You're the leader of this team." "You're the leader, Sam," Izuku corrected quietly. "You're Captain America. The public face. The inspiration. And you're the strategist," Sam countered, tossing the used wipe into a disposal unit. "The one who gets us all home. The plan was good, Izuku. It was perfect, but the plan should never end with you tanking a bomb with your chest. Promise me you'll work on that." Izuku just nodded, too tired to argue. He knew Sam was right. The self-sacrificial streak that had been branded into him since the day he inherited One for All was a hard habit to break. He pulled out his notebook, Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 27, and a pen. The book was battered, the cover soft with wear, its pages filled with his frantic, cramped handwriting and detailed sketches. He flipped to a new page, the scratching of his pen the only sound for a moment. Mission debrief. IM Cell, Baltimore. Team cohesion, 8 out of 10. Communication was clear. Bucky, flawless execution on sniper removal. Slight hesitation on CQC assist, check for lingering soreness in left shoulder joint from training sim. Sam, excellent improvisation as distraction. Flight pattern predictable after third pass, need to incorporate more erratic maneuvers. Peter, crowd control highly effective. Tends to rely on quips to manage combat stress. May cause distraction in missions requiring absolute stealth. Wanda, containment field held against immense quantum pressure. Energy signature fluctuated when communicating distress. Monitor emotional state pre- and post-mission for correlation. Self-assessment. Over-reliance on high output 1 for all bursts for endgame scenarios. Tactical blind spot. Must develop more mid-range, sustainable solutions. Black Whip deployment improving. Finer controls still needed for delicate tasks. He muttered under his breath as he wrote, a stream of consciousness analysis that was both a debrief and a form of meditation. Peter leaned over the back of his seat. Dude, you're supposed to be resting, not giving yourself a performance review. We won. The bad guys are webbed up for the cops. The glowy thing didn't go boom. That's a win in my book. Every fight can be a lesson. Izuku replied without looking up. If we don't learn from them, we'll repeat our mistakes when the stakes are higher. He's not wrong. Bucky grunted from his corner, not taking his eyes off his pistol. Complacency kills. The rest of the flight passed in comfortable silence. By the time the Quinjet touched down on the landing pad at the sprawling, state-of-the-art Avengers compound in upstate New York, the first hints of dawn were painting the eastern sky in shades of violet and rose. The place was an oasis of futuristic architecture nestled in a sea of green forest, a symbol of hope and security. It felt like home. As they disembarked, the compound's automated voice, FRIDY, greeted them. Welcome back, Avengers. Medical scan indicates minor injuries and severe fatigue. I recommend a minimum of 8 hours of regenerative sleep. Thanks, Friday, Sam said, stretching his arms over his head. I'm hitting the shower, then the kitchen. I could eat a horse. The team dispersed, each heading towards their own routine. It was a familiar pattern, a quiet domesticity that was a stark contrast to the violence of their work. This was the part of the job Izuku cherished most, the quiet after. He saw Bucky head towards the armory, Wanda towards the small, serene garden she had cultivated on the west side of the compound, a place of life and growth that was her own personal anchor. Sam, true to his word, went to the communal kitchen. Peter followed him, no doubt hoping to snag some of Sam's famous pancakes. Izuku, however, went to his room. It was sparse, functional, but with a few personal touches. A poster of All Might from his world hung on one wall, a faded, precious relic that had survived the dimensional trip. His desk was littered with schematics for support gear and half-finished notebooks. He sat down, intending to transcribe his field notes properly, but exhaustion hit him like a physical blow. His head drooped, and within minutes he was asleep, his cheek pressed against a page filled with diagrams of Captain America's shield trajectories. He woke a few hours later, not to an alarm, but to a gentle knock on his door. He sat up, rubbing the ink smudge off his face and blinking the sleep from his eyes. Come in. The door slid open to reveal Peter Parker, holding 2 steaming mugs. He was dressed in a worn MIT hoodie and sweatpants, looking less like a superhero and more like the college student he was trying to be. Brought you coffee, Peter said, setting one of the mugs on Izuku's desk. Figured your internal monologue was probably already writing a dissertation on a better way to sleep. Izuku gratefully took the mug, the warmth seeping into his hands. Thanks, Peter. You didn't have to. Nah, it's cool. Besides, I wanted to ask you something. Peter leaned against the doorframe, his expression uncharacteristically serious. Back there with the bomb, you weren't just guessing, were you? About redirecting the energy. Izuku took a sip of the coffee. It was strong, just the way he liked it. No. It was a calculated risk. I've been studying the way Wanda's chaos magic interacts with different energy types. It doesn't just block or contain, it manipulates the baseline reality of what it's touching. I theorized that if she created a path of least resistance, the quantum energy would follow it, like water down a drain. Peter stared at him, a look of awe on his face. You theorized that? In the middle of a fight? In about 12 seconds? My brain just goes, glowy thing bad, and I hope for the best. Izuku shrugged, a faint blush creeping up his neck. It's just how my mind works. I see a problem, and I start breaking it down into smaller pieces. Quirks, powers, tech, it's all just a system. If you understand the system, you can find a way to make it work for you. That's why you're the leader, man, Peter said, his voice sincere. It's not because you're the strongest, though, let's be real, the whole green lightning comet thing is pretty top tier. It's because you see all of us, all the pieces on the board, better than we see ourselves. The praise was both warming and deeply uncomfortable. The title of leader still felt like a suit that was several sizes too big. He was just a kid from Muzutafu who had wanted to be a hero. He had never asked to be a strategist for Earth's mightiest heroes in a dimension that wasn't even his own. "I'm just doing my part," he said quietly. A sudden, jarring alert blared through the compound's speakers, cutting their conversation short. It wasn't the loud, frantic alarm for an external threat. It was a priority alpha signal, reserved for the highest level of internal alert. "Unidentified Quinjet on final approach," FRIDY announced, her voice clipped and formal. "Transponder codes are authenticated level 10. Director Nicholas Fury override." Izuku and Peter exchanged a look of alarm. Nick Fury didn't just drop by for coffee. His presence meant one of two things: the start of a world-ending crisis, or the end of one. They raced to the main hangar, meeting the others along the way. Sam was already in his Captain America gear, shield at the ready. Bucky had his sidearm holstered but his hand rested near it, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. Wanda stood slightly behind them, her hands glowing with a soft, protective crimson light. They were a coiled spring, ready for anything. The Quinjet's landing ramp lowered with a hiss, casting a long shadow across the hangar floor. A single figure emerged, silhouetted against the bright morning sun. Nicholas Fury. He was dressed in his customary black trench coat and eye patch, but something was off. His usual aura of unflappable, omniscient authority was gone. Today, he looked tired. He looked old. And he looked grim. He wasn't alone. He was half supporting another figure, a tall, green-skinned alien in a tattered purple and black uniform. The Skrull, Talos, leaned heavily on Fury, his face a mask of pain. One side of his body was covered in what looked like severe energy burns. His uniform melted to his skin in places. "Fury," Sam said, taking a cautious step forward. "What the hell is this?" Fury ignored him, his one good eye scanning the faces of the assembled Avengers. It rested on Izuku for a fraction of a second longer than the others. "Get him to the med bay," Fury ordered, his voice a low rasp. Now, as two SHIELD medics rushed forward with a hover stretcher, Talos looked at the team, his eyes wide with a terror that went beyond his physical pain. "They're here," he rasped, his voice a dry whisper. "They're already here." Once Talos was being cared for, Fury led the 5 Avengers into the main briefing room. The large holographic table in the center of the room flickered to life, but Fury didn't display any tactical data. He just stood there, his hands clasped behind his back, the silence stretching until it became a physical weight. 2 years ago, Fury began, his voice devoid of any emotion. Talos came to me with a warning. A radicalized sect of Skrulls, extremists who saw his efforts to find their people a new home as a betrayal. They believe Earth is their birthright, a prize to be taken, not a refuge to be requested. They call themselves the True Believers, led by a zealot named Klar. "We've dealt with alien zealots before," Sam said, crossing his arms. "What makes this different? Because their method of attack isn't an invasion fleet," Fury said, his gaze turning hard as granite. "It's an infiltration. Perfect. Seamless. Undetectable. They've developed a way to block their biological markers. Not even another Skrull can tell who is who. They can replicate a person down to the last memory, the last nerve, the last thought." A cold dread began to seep into the room. Izuku felt his own danger sense begin to stir, not as a sharp alarm, but as a low, nauseating hum, a background static of wrongness. "Talos and his loyalists have been hunting them in the shadows," Fury continued. 3 days ago, they got a lead on a high-level operative. Someone placed deep inside our own intelligence infrastructure. They set a trap. But it was a trap for them. Fury finally looked up, his one eye boring into them, filled with a cold, terrifying fury. Talos was the only survivor. His entire team was wiped out. But before they confirmed the identity of the operative. He pressed a button on the holographic table. A file appeared. It was a SHIELD personnel file, level 9 clearance. The photo was of a woman with sharp features and a no-nonsense expression that every one of them recognized. Deputy Director Caden. A woman they had worked with. A woman who had given them mission briefings, who had coordinated their support logistics. A woman who had been in this very room a dozen times. "We found her body in a safe house in Brussels an hour ago," Fury said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "The real Deputy Director Caden. Forensic analysis says she's been dead for at least 18 months. The air was sucked out of the room. 18 months. An imposter had been standing at the right hand of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s command structure for a year and a half. Giving orders. Accessing intelligence. Learning their weaknesses. How many more are there?" Wanda asked, her voice barely audible. Fury turned to face them fully, the grim reality of their situation crashing down on them all. His next words would haunt them for the rest of their lives. "We don't know," he said. "It could be anyone. Your S.H.I.E.L.D. support staff. The Secretary of Defense. The person you buy your coffee from." He let the silence hang for a moment, letting the paranoia take root. His eye moved from Sam to Bucky, to Wanda, to Peter, and finally to Izuku. "The person you had breakfast with could be one of them," he said, his voice as cold as the grave. "The person standing next to you right now could be one of them." In that instant, the sanctuary of the Avengers compound was shattered. The trust that bound them together, the foundation of their team, fractured. For the first time, Izuku Midoriya looked at the faces of his friends, Sam's steadfast resolve, Bucky's guarded loyalty, Wanda's fragile hope, Peter's earnest heart, and a sliver of ice-cold poison entered his thoughts. Could it be one of them? His danger sense, which had been a low hum, suddenly spiked, becoming a suffocating wave of anxiety. It wasn't pointing at a person. It wasn't warning of an incoming attack. It was screaming at him from every direction at once. The threat wasn't at the door. It was already inside. The quiet was over. The war had already begun. The silence in the briefing room was a physical entity. It was heavy, suffocating, pressing in on them from all sides. Fury's words, "The person standing next to you right now could be one of them," hung in the air like radioactive fallout, poisoning the very atoms of the trust that had been painstakingly built within these walls. Izuku Midoriya felt his own mind, his greatest analytical asset, turning against him. He looked at Sam, whose jaw was set in a line of grim determination, trying to project the strength of Captain America when he likely felt the same cold dread as everyone else. He looked at Bucky, who had retreated so far into himself he seemed to be carved from stone, his eyes scanning the room, already assessing everyone, including himself, as a potential threat. He saw Wanda, her fingers twitching, a faint wisp of scarlet vapor curling around them, a subconscious shield against the threat she couldn't see. And he saw Peter, who looked young and horribly lost, the quips and jokes dying in his throat, replaced by the wide-eyed fear of someone whose found family was suddenly built on quicksand. Then, his eyes met Fury's. The director's gaze was hard, unforgiving, but beneath it, Izuku saw a flicker of something else, exhaustion. This wasn't a problem Fury could solve with a bigger gun, or a secret helicarrier. This was a cancer on the system, and he was a surgeon holding a scalpel, trying to figure out where to cut without killing the patient. It was Sam who finally broke the silence, his voice a low rumble. "How long, Fury? How long have you known this was a possibility?" "Known? For years. The potential was always there," Fury admitted, his tone flat. "But this new faction, this level of infiltration, Talos confirmed the full scope of it less than a week ago. They call themselves the Don Tolan, the true heirs in their tongue. They believe Skrullos was a paradise lost not because of the Kree, but because of their own weakness. Their compassion. Claw preaches a doctrine of brutal strength. He believes any species that cannot defend its world from a perfect infiltration doesn't deserve to have one." As if on cue, a holographic screen flickered to life beside Fury, showing Talos in the med bay. He was propped up, a nanosuture array knitting his burned skin back together, but his face was haggard. "He is charismatic." Talos' voice was a weak croak, amplified by the room's speakers. "He speaks of our history, our gods. He twists our scripture. He tells our lost and broken people that the universe owes us a debt, and that Earth is the first payment." He coughed, a racking sound. "He has developed what he calls a chameleon sequence, a biological alteration. It cloaks the unique energy signature of our shape-shifting. It makes us invisible, even to our own kind. When my team cornered the imposter of your deputy director, we didn't know she was one of them until she tore them apart. His voice broke, thick with grief. They died never even seeing their enemy's true face. The image of Talos vanished, leaving the team with the weight of his failure and his loss. This was the new reality. An enemy that looked like your friend, sounded like your colleague, and held your memories. How do you fight a shadow that wears your own face? Suddenly Izuku's world tilted. A low, persistent hum started in the back of his skull, like the buzz of a failing fluorescent light. It wasn't a sharp spike of warning. It was a dull, constant thrum. Danger, the word echoed in his mind, but it had no source, no direction. It was just there. Everywhere. He squeezed his eyes shut for a second, trying to focus. Danger sense had always been a precise tool, a sniper rifle of precognition that warned of a specific, incoming threat. This felt like standing in an ocean of static. The quirk was overloading, feeding on the ambient paranoia in the room, amplifying his own fear and the fear of those around him. It was a feedback loop of pure, undiluted anxiety. Danger, 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 danger. The hum intensified, becoming a low-voltage current under his skin, making the hairs on his arms stand up. He looked at Sam. The hum grew a fraction louder. He looked at Wanda. It pulsed in time with her heartbeat. He looked at Bucky, then Peter. With each glance, the feeling grew, a tight band of pressure around his skull. His own quirk was turning his friends into sources of a vague, terrifying threat signal. It wasn't telling him they were Skrulls. It was simply screaming that they could be, and it couldn't tell the difference. Izuku? You okay? Sam's voice cut through the haze. Everyone was looking at him. He realized he must have paled, his hand unconsciously pressed to his temple. I'm fine, he lied, forcing himself to lower his hand. He took a steadying breath, trying to push the sensory overload into a box in the back of his mind. Analyze the problem. Don't become the problem. Fury, what's our first move? Director Caden's imposter must have left a trail. A network. A point of contact. Fury nodded, a glimmer of approval in his eye. He respected a mind that cut straight to the tactical solution. That's the one piece of good news. Before Talos' team was compromised, they managed to retrieve a fragment of encrypted data from the imposter's private terminal. It's not much, but it points to a single location, a GSA Federal Records Center in downtown Washington, D.C. A records building? That's their base? Bucky scoffed, his skepticism a tangible force in the room. Unlikely, Fury countered. More likely a dead drop. Or a communications hub, hidden in plain sight amongst trillions of terabytes of mundane government data, miles of servers, shielded by concrete and bureaucracy. It's the perfect place to hide a needle in a galactic-sized haystack. The data fragment we have is a key. It should give you access to a specific server partition Caden was using. So we go in, get the data, and get out. Sam summarized, shifting into Captain America mode. It was a comfort to see, a small island of normalcy in a sea of chaos. It won't be that simple, Fury warned. We have no idea what's waiting for you. The Skrulls inside could be the security guards, the IT technicians, the janitor. Every person you see is a potential hostile. You'll be operating in a minefield of suspicion, and the mines look exactly like civilians. Izuku felt the hum of his danger sense intensify again. A minefield. That was the perfect word for it. What are the rules of engagement? Wanda asked softly, the question hanging with unspoken weight. How do we fight an enemy we can't identify until they're trying to kill us? Your primary objective is the data. Avoid engagement unless absolutely necessary, Fury commanded. But if you are engaged, do not hesitate. Any hostile, regardless of the face they're wearing, is a threat to global security. Do what you have to do. The unspoken part of that order was clear. Be prepared to fight people who look like allies. Be prepared for the possibility that a familiar face might peel back to reveal a monster underneath. We'll need a plan, Izuku said, forcing his voice to remain steady despite the buzzing in his molars. He walked to the holographic table, his mind already beginning to erect analytical walls against the tide of his haywire quirk. He pulled up a schematic of the GSA building. This mission requires absolute stealth. No loud entries. No overt displays of power until we're compromised. He began to issue directives, his voice gaining confidence as he slipped into the familiar role of strategist. Wanda, you'll be our eyes and ears. From an adjacent rooftop, I need you to do a low-level psychic sweep. Don't push too hard. We don't want to alert any latent psionics. Just listen for wrongness. Thoughts that don't align with a human mind. Bucky, Sam, you're on insertion. There's a maintenance access point on the sublevel 3 blocks away that connects to the building's primary utility corridor. You'll secure the entry point and the route to the server farm. He turned to Peter. Peter, you're on tech. Once they're inside, you'll infiltrate their network wirelessly and guide them past the digital security. More importantly, I need you to monitor all internal SHIELD and government comms channels. If there's a leak, it'll come from there. And you? Sam asked. I'll be with Wanda, Izuku said. Coordinating from a central point. My danger sense is... He hesitated, not wanting to admit the full extent of its malfunction. Unreliable at the moment. It's too saturated. I'm more useful providing tactical analysis from a distance. It was a half-truth. He was a liability on the ground. Every person he passed would feel like a bomb about to go off. The team nodded, accepting their roles. For a brief moment, they were the Avengers again, a cohesive unit with a mission. But as they geared up in the hangar, the silence was different. It wasn't the comfortable quiet of professionals. It was the tense, guarded silence of strangers forced to share a foxhole, each one wondering about the person next to them. The night in Washington, D.C. was humid, the air thick with the promise of a storm. From their vantage point on the roof of a hotel across from the monolithic, gray block of the GSA building, the world seemed deceptively peaceful. Headlights painted streaks of red and white on the streets below. The city was alive, oblivious. Izuku stood beside Wanda, a tablet in his hands displaying multiple feeds, the building's schematics, Peter's network intrusion progress, and biometric data for Sam and Bucky. The low hum of his danger sense was a constant companion, a headache that refused to subside. He could feel Wanda next to him, a pool of calm focus in the storm of his own senses. She had her eyes closed, her head tilted as if listening to a distant song. Anything? He whispered. It's noisy, she murmured, her brow furrowed in concentration. Thousands of minds. Stress about deadlines, thoughts of dinner, mundane worries. It's a sea of humanity. If there's something alien in there, it's hiding itself well. But there is an echo. A pattern of suppressed thoughts in the security detail. They're all thinking about their patrol routes, their duties, but underneath, there's a shared, disciplined thought pattern. Almost rehearsed. Keep listening, Izuku instructed, his eyes on the tablet. Sam, Bucky, you're at the access point. Report. We're here. Sam's voice came through the comms, low and clear. Panels mag-locked. Standard shield issue. Bucky's on it. There was a soft click, then Bucky's gruff voice. I'm in. We're proceeding down the corridor. It's quiet. Too quiet. Peter, how's our network access? Izuku asked. Firewalls are down, security cameras are on a loop, and their motion sensors think we're a bunch of rats. Peter replied, his voice a rapid-fire whisper. Classic Tuesday night. I'm guiding them to the server farm now. Left at the next junction, guys. Watch out for the steam pipe on your right. For the next 10 minutes, the mission proceeded with textbook precision. It was a well-oiled machine. Izuku guided them, Peter cleared their digital path, and Sam and Bucky moved like ghosts through the guts of the building. But the underlying tension was a coiled serpent, waiting to strike. Izuku could hear it in the curtness of Bucky's replies and the forced calm in Sam's tone. They reached the server farm, a vast, cold room filled with rows upon rows of humming black monoliths, a cathedral of data. Blue lights blinked in the chilled air. We're in, Sam reported. The server partition from Fury's data is in the central row. Section Gamma 7, I see it, Bucky said. Moving to interface. As Bucky approached the server, a new alert flashed on Peter's feed. He had set up a passive sniffer on all official channels, a digital ghost listening for whispers. Izuku? Peter's voice was suddenly tight. I've got something. Just got a priority alpha alert flagged on an internal NSA channel. It's a silent alarm, triggered from inside the GSA building. They're reporting a containment breach in, oh crap. In server farm Gamma 7, Izuku's blood ran cold. How? There are no pressure plates, no laser grids, it wasn't a sensor. Peter cut in. The alert was triggered manually. By someone inside the building. Before Izuku could process the implications, Sam's voice crackled with urgency. Multiple hostiles. Security guards, they're pouring in from both entrances. We're boxed in, it was a trap. Izuku breathed, his mind racing. They had been expected. The data key wasn't a key, it was bait. No time for that, we need an exit strategy. Sam yelled over the sound of plasma fire. Bucky, get the damn drive. We're not leaving without it, almost there. Bucky grunted. A new message flashed on Izuku's tablet. It wasn't an official alert. It was a single line of text, routed through an anonymous, encrypted channel that piggybacked onto their comms frequency. A ghost in their machine. Abort. BB compromised. Izuku stared at it. BB Bucky Barnes. A new seed of doubt, delivered like a poisoned dart. Was it a Skrull trick? Or a genuine warning from a hidden ally? He had no way of knowing. His danger sense was just a roar of undifferentiated panic. What's going on, Izuku? Wanda asked, seeing the look on his face. Izuku, talk to me. What's the play? Sam demanded. On the comms, the tactical argument erupted. We're out of time, Sam! Bucky's voice was strained. I can hold them off. You grab the drive and go. We don't leave people behind. Sam shot back. That's not how we do this. This isn't about how we do things, it's about the mission. Bucky retorted, the sound of his handgun barking a staccato rhythm. That's the kind of thinking that gets people killed, Sam. Hesitation, and your kind of thinking gets the mission scrubbed and lets the enemy walk away clean. Sam's voice was raw with frustration. The argument was a perfect storm, preying on their deepest insecurities. Sam's unwavering morality versus Bucky's ruthless pragmatism. The soldier versus the symbol. It was the exact fracture point a clever enemy would exploit. The anonymous message blinked on his screen. Abort. BB compromised. His heart hammered in his chest. His danger sense was screaming, the anonymous warning was screaming, and his teammates were screaming at each other. He had to make a call. Logic. Analysis. What was the enemy's goal? They're not trying to kill us, he realized with a horrifying clarity. They could have ambushed us in the corridor. They waited until we were at the objective. Until we were divided. This wasn't about stopping them. This was about breaking them. Sam, Bucky, stop! Izuku's voice cut through the comms, sharp and commanding. This is a psyop. They're trying to split you. Bucky, forget the drive. It's probably corrupted or trapped anyway. Your new objective is egress. Both of you. West wall. It leads to a ventilation shaft. Peter, can you get them out through there? The shaft leads to the roof, but the exhaust fan is shielded. Peter began. I don't care if it's welded shut. Izuku snapped, the pressure making his tone harder than he intended. Get it open. Now. Sam, Bucky, move! There was a moment of hesitation. He had just contradicted a direct order from Captain America and invalidated Bucky's entire effort. Acknowledged, Sam said, the single word heavy with reluctance. On your lead, Izuku. The sound of fighting shifted as they began a tactical retreat. Plasma bolts sizzled past the microphone, and the heavy thud of Sam's shield finding its mark echoed through the comms. They were working together again, but the damage was done. The argument, born from stress and fear, had left a scar. Fan override is engaged, Peter shouted. Shafts open. Go, go, go! Izuku held his breath until he heard Sam's confirmation. We're clear. On the roof. Moving to exfil point. Wanda, let's go, Izuku said, grabbing his gear. They moved swiftly, melting back into the shadows of the city just as the first police sirens began to wail in the distance. The flight back was a tomb. No one spoke. Sam and Bucky sat on opposite sides of the Quinjet, refusing to even look at each other. Wanda was withdrawn, the earlier mission's psychic noise having clearly taken a toll. Peter was furiously typing on a datapad, his face illuminated by lines of code, trying to trace the source of the anonymous message, but Izuku knew it would be a dead end. He sat by himself, his own notebook open on his lap. But he wasn't writing. He was staring at a blank page, the mission replaying in his mind on an endless, agonizing loop. They had failed. They had walked into a trap, lost the objective, and almost torn each other apart in the process. The seed of doubt, planted by Fury in the briefing room, had sprouted its first venomous leaf. The anonymous message. Bucky's pragmatism bordering on self-sacrifice. Sam's hesitation. Every detail was now suspect, every action questionable. When they arrived back at the compound, the team dispersed without a word. No debrief. No shared meal. Just the sound of retreating footsteps and closing doors. It felt less like a headquarters and more like a mausoleum. Izuku went to the briefing room, the mission data already uploaded to the holographic table. He replayed every second of it, comms chatter, biometric readouts, Peter's network logs. He analyzed the cadence of their voices, their heart rates during the argument, the exact timing of the false alarm. He filled page after page with frantic notes, trying to find a pattern, a logical explanation, and then he saw it. The silent alarm that Peter had caught wasn't triggered by a hidden button or a tripwire. According to the building's internal logs, it was activated from a security console on the third floor, a floor Sam and Bucky had never been on. But the alert itself was routed through an old, rarely used shield emergency frequency before being patched into the NSA system. It was an intentionally convoluted path, a path designed to be noticed by someone like Peter, who was looking for exactly that kind of anomaly. It was bait. All of it. The data key was bait. The alarm was bait. The mission was bait. Fury walked in, finding him standing there in the dark, illuminated only by the soft blue glow of the holograms. "Report," the director said, his voice leaving no room for excuses. "The mission was a failure," Izuku said, his voice hollow. "We retrieved no actionable intelligence. We were compromised the moment we entered the building." He looked up from the table, his eyes meeting Fury's. "But we weren't meant to succeed. This was a test." Fury remained silent, letting him continue. "They fed us a target they knew we'd take," Izuku explained, pointing to the data logs. "They let us get inside, then triggered an alarm designed to look like an internal leak. They boxed us in, not to kill us, but to apply pressure. To create friction." He gestured to the comms transcript, where the argument between Sam and Bucky was highlighted in red. "They targeted the philosophical seam between our two most experienced soldiers. The soldier and the symbol. Pragmatism versus idealism." He finally looked at Fury, the full, horrifying realization dawning on him. "They weren't trying to stop us from getting the data. They don't need to. They're already inside our heads. They were testing us. They were running a diagnostic, Fury. They were seeing how easily we would break." A deep, profound chill settled over Izuku. This was a war unlike any he had ever imagined. The enemy wasn't an army to be punched or a fortress to be smashed. The enemy was a whisper. A doubt. A seed of paranoia planted right in the heart of their trust. And in the cold, sterile briefing room, surrounded by the ghosts of their failure, Izuku Midoriya knew that the first battle of that war had just been fought, and they had lost. The days that followed the disastrous mission in DC were defined by a silence that was heavier and more corrosive than any shouting match could ever be. The Avengers compound, once a vibrant hub of activity and camaraderie, had become a collection of quiet, isolated islands. The team moved through its halls like ghosts, haunted by the memory of their own suspicion. The air, once filled with Peter's chatter, Sam's easy laughter, or the hum of Wanda's power, was now thick with unspoken words and averted gazes. Izuku found himself retreating into the one place he felt he had any control, his notebooks. He spent hours in the training room, running simulations against shape-shifting opponents, trying to code an algorithm that could predict Skrull tactics. He filled pages with diagrams, probability charts, and frantic, scrawled questions. He was trying to build an analytical fortress, a wall of logic to keep the chaos at bay. But every equation he wrote, every scenario he mapped, led back to the same unsolvable variable, the human heart. Or, in this case, the human heart that might be a Skrull imitation. Sam Wilson tried to be the glue. As Captain America, it was his duty. He called for team meetings that no one fully participated in, organized sparring sessions where the blows felt more personal than professional, and initiated conversations that died of starvation in the tense quiet. He was a man trying to hold together a structure whose very foundation had been turned to sand. Bucky had all but vanished. He spent most of his time in the compound's cavernous armory or on the remote firing range, finding solace in the cold, mechanical certainty of his weapons. When he did appear, his face was a mask of stoic indifference, but Izuku, the obsessive analyst of people, could see the old shadows creeping back into his eyes. The Winter Soldier was a ghost that had been laid to rest, but the paranoia of the secret invasion was a shovel, digging at his grave. Peter, usually a supernova of energy, had dimmed. He buried himself in his lab, tinkering with his web shooters, upgrading his suit's AI, anything to keep his hands and mind busy. The easy, friendly banter he shared with Izuku had been replaced with a polite but distant respect. He was an orphan twice over, first by tragedy, then by magic, and the fear of losing this new, fragile family was causing him to preemptively build walls. Wanda was the only one who seemed to find a semblance of peace, though it was a fragile one. She spent her days in the small, glass-walled garden she tended with meticulous care. Surrounded by the simple, honest life of her plants, she could perhaps escape the complexities of the minds around her. But even then, Izuku would sometimes see her staring at a blooming rose, her fingers glowing with a faint, anxious red, as if questioning the reality of the very petals she touched. This was the state of Earth's mightiest heroes, fractured, isolated, and waiting for the other shoe to drop. It dropped on a Tuesday morning. It didn't come with a Quinjet or an alien signal. It came, as so many modern disasters do, from a 24-hour news network. Izuku was in the communal kitchen, forcing himself to eat something other than protein bars, when the image on the large wall-mounted screen changed. The usual political punditry was replaced by a breaking news banner in stark, alarming red: terror in Geneva, global peace summit attacked. The screen showed horrifying, chaotic footage. Smoke billowed from the side of the historic Palais des Nations. Panicked diplomats and civilians were running, their faces masks of terror. The camera, clearly from a news helicopter, zoomed in on the source of the devastation, a gaping, blackened hole torn in the west wing of the building. Sam was the first to enter the room, a towel around his neck, fresh from a morning run. He froze, his eyes locked on the screen. Peter was next, then Wanda. Bucky, drawn by the sudden, grim silence, appeared last, leaning against the doorframe, his expression unreadable. "Reports are still coming in," a frantic news anchor was saying. "But sources confirm a massive explosion rocked the summit just minutes ago." This summit, which brought together delegates from over 50 nations to discuss new global de-escalation treaties, has now become a scene of tragedy. The death toll is currently unknown but is expected to be significant. Izuku's mind was already working, discarding possibilities. This wasn't a conventional bomb. The blast pattern was too focused, the structural damage too precise, almost surgical. It was designed for maximum casualties with a specific signature. It was a message. Then, the anchor's voice became grave. "We are now receiving new footage, ladies and gentlemen. A warning, the images you are about to see are disturbing." The screen switched to shaky, cell phone video from a bystander on the ground. It showed the moments just before the explosion. A figure was moving through the chaos of the panicked crowd, a dark shape of impossible speed and brutal efficiency. The figure took down 3 security guards with a series of fluid, devastating blows. Then, it stopped for a fraction of a second, turning towards the camera's direction. The image was blurry, pixelated, but 2 details were sickeningly clear. A flash of silver from a bionic arm. And the unmistakable silhouette of a man built for one purpose: to be a weapon. The figure then planted a small, glowing device on the building's foundation and blurred away an instant before the world erupted in fire and smoke. "My God!" Peter whispered, his voice trembling. "No," Sam said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "It can't be." But it was. The media had their narrative. Within minutes, every network was running the same headline, showing the same blurry footage, asking the same terrifying question. The Winter Soldier had returned. The final nail in the coffin was hammered in an hour later. Thaddeus, Thunderbolt, Ross, now the Secretary of State, stood at a podium in the White House press room, his face a mask of grim, righteous fury. James Buchanan Barnes, a man with a history of violence, assassination, and terror, is a ghost we thought had been exorcised, Ross declared, his voice booming from the screen. We were told he was reformed. We were told he was an Avenger, a hero. Today, that lie has been exposed. The world has a right to feel betrayed. It has a right to be afraid. The United States government, in accordance with the Sokovia Accords, is issuing a global warrant for the arrest of Barnes. He is to be considered armed, extremely dangerous, and an enemy of world peace. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. As for the so-called Avengers who have harbored this fugitive, their status is now under immediate and serious review. The screen went back to the pundits, but no one in the room was listening. The silence was back, but now it was charged with a new, agonizing electricity. Sam turned to Bucky, his eyes blazing with a fierce, protective loyalty. They're not putting you in a cage again, Buck? I won't let them. Bucky didn't look at him. He was staring at his own metal hand as if it were a venomous snake. His face was pale, his expression one of weary, soul-crushing resignation. He had lived this nightmare before. The accusations, the manhunt, the entire world seeing him as a monster. He looked up, his gaze sweeping over the others. He wasn't looking for support. He was looking for doubt. And he found it. It wasn't an outright accusation. It was in the subtle shift of Peter's stance, a half-step back. It was in the flicker of red in Wanda's eyes, a flare of fear she couldn't quite contain. She, more than anyone, knew what it was like to be a weapon that could be turned against your will. It wasn't me, Bucky said, his voice quiet, almost devoid of emotion. It wasn't a plea. It was a statement of a fact he wasn't even sure his own family believed. We know that, Sam said immediately, a little too quickly. He turned to the others. Right? Peter wouldn't meet his eyes. The footage, it looked. He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Appearances can be deceiving, Wanda said softly, but her voice lacked conviction. We of all people should know that. Izuku felt like he was suffocating. The buzzing of his danger sense had returned, a frantic, nauseating thrum centered around the man who was once the Winter Soldier. He knew, logically, that this was the Skrull's next move. It was a perfect, diabolical gambit. They had targeted the team's most vulnerable member, using his past as a weapon against their present. But logic was a flickering candle in a hurricane of fear and doubt. He had to be sure. He hated himself for it, hated the part of his brain that couldn't turn off, that had to analyze and verify. But the stakes were too high for blind faith. The world was on the brink of chaos. If there was even a 0.01% chance that Bucky had been compromised, that his programming had been reactivated, he had to know. We can't just rely on what we feel is true, Izuku said, his voice coming out colder and more clinical than he intended. We have to prove it. For the world, and for ourselves. He turned to Bucky, the analytical part of his mind taking over, pushing aside the friend and leaving only the strategist. Bucky! Where were you this morning, between 0800 and 1000 Zulu time? The shift in the room was palpable. It was no longer a family defending one of their own. It was an interrogation. Bucky's head snapped up, his blue eyes turning to chips of ice. The weary resignation was gone, replaced by a deep, wounded betrayal. It wasn't Ross's accusation that hurt him. It was Izuku's question. Here, Bucky said, his voice flat and hard. I was in the armory. Alone. Can anyone verify that? Izuku pressed, hating every word that came out of his mouth. Does it matter? Bucky shot back, his voice dangerously low. Even if they could, would you believe them? Or would you wonder if they were covering for me? Or if they were one of them too? He had perfectly articulated the poison that was now coursing through all of their veins. This isn't an accusation, it's a procedure. Izuku tried to explain, but the words felt hollow. We need to establish a timeline, build a case. Stop! Sam interrupted, stepping between them. He looked at Izuku, his expression a mixture of disappointment and frustration. He's not a suspect, Izuku. He's our friend. This isn't one of your notebooks. You can't analyze your way to trust. The rebuke hit Izuku harder than any physical blow. He fell silent, the cold logic of his approach crashing against the hot, messy reality of human emotion. He was trying to solve the problem, but in the process, he was becoming part of it. He spent the rest of the day in a self-imposed exile in the compound's main data hub, pulling every frame of the Geneva footage, running it through every analytical filter he could devise. He had to find the proof. He had to fix the crack he had just helped create. His investigation became a series of painful encounters. He approached Wanda first, asking her to reach out, to see if she could sense any lingering psychic residue on Bucky, anything that felt like external control or programming. She looked at him, her eyes sad. You want me to violate his mind, Izuku? To treat him like a bomb that needs defusing? The scarlet energy around her hands pulsed erratically. My powers are not a lie detector. They are a part of me. A part one I'm still learning to control. Using them like that, under this much stress, it's dangerous. For both of us. She turned away from him, retreating to her garden, the unspoken accusation clear. You are asking me to become the monster they fear I am. He went to Peter next, hoping his fellow science enthusiasts would understand his need for empirical data. He found him in his lab, surrounded by holographic schematics. Peter, I need your help. Izuku began, holding up a datapad. I'm running spectral analysis on the footage. If the imposter was a Skrull, there might be a subtle energy signature, something the camera barely picked up. Peter didn't even look up from his work. So we're just assuming it's an imposter now? We're not even considering other possibilities? He asked, his voice sharp. Of course it's an imposter, Izuku said, taken aback. I just need the data to prove it. Do you? Peter finally turned, his young face hardened by a weariness that didn't belong there. Or do you just need to fill a notebook so you don't have to deal with the fact that this team is falling apart? That we're all so scared, we're starting to look at each other and see monsters? He gestured vaguely around the lab. I'm busy, Izuku. I have suit maintenance. He turned his back, effectively dismissing him. Peter, who had always been his most enthusiastic ally, was shutting him out. He was retreating into the safety of his technology, away from the terrifying uncertainty of people. Izuku was alone. His analytical approach, the very thing that made him a leader, had alienated his entire team. He sat in the dark data hub, the footage of the Bucky imposter playing on a loop, the faces of his disappointed friends superimposed over it in his mind. He had failed. He had failed as a leader, and he had failed as a friend. He was about to give up, to drown in his own inadequacy, when a thought struck him. It was a line from one of his conversations with Peter, weeks ago, about the quantum destabilizer from the Baltimore mission. Peter had mentioned the unique energy signature it emitted, a chaotic, unstable quantum frequency. What if? His fingers flew across the keyboard. He wasn't looking for Skrull energy anymore. He isolated the footage of the explosion itself, cross-referencing its energy signature with the data they had collected from the AIM device. It was a long shot, a desperate stab in the dark. Hours passed. The compound was silent and dark. He was about to abandon the search when a small, blinking light appeared in the corner of his monitor. Anomalous signature detected. His heart hammered in his chest. He ran a deeper scan, isolating the milliseconds of the blast frame by frame. And there it was. A faint, almost imperceptible shimmer around the edges of the explosion. A subtle, chaotic ghosting effect in the frames. It was the same quantum signature. The bomb in Geneva used the same unstable, exotic technology as the AIM device. It was a link. It was proof. But it wasn't enough. As shared bomb technology didn't clear Bucky's name. He slumped back in his chair, the brief flicker of hope extinguished. Then, the door to the data hub slid open. It was Peter. He was holding 2 mugs of what smelled like hot chocolate, an unspoken peace offering. FRIDY said your caffeine levels were reaching critical mass, Peter said quietly, setting one of the mugs down beside him. He glanced at the screen. Find anything? Izuku didn't answer. He just pointed to the anomalous signature. It's the same energy as Baltimore. Peter leaned in, his eyes widening. He typed a few commands, pulling up his own diagnostic programs. You're right, it's a match. But how does that help Bucky? It doesn't, Izuku said, defeated. Wait a sec, Peter said, his brow furrowed. If Skrull Tech leaves behind this quantum fingerprint on an explosion, maybe their shape-shifting does, too? It's all based on cellular replication, right? Quantum entanglement of biological matter? It's theoretical, but hope, sharp and sudden, pierced through Izuku's exhaustion. He looked at Peter, who was now typing furiously, his earlier alienation forgotten, replaced by the familiar spark of scientific curiosity. If we apply the same spectral filter to the footage of the Bucky imposter, we might find the same signature. Peter finished, his voice electric with excitement. A tiny shimmer, a visual echo of the shape-shifting process, so fast the naked eye would never see it. For the next hour, they worked together, a seamless fusion of Izuku's analytical mind and Peter's technical genius. They built a new filter, layering dozens of algorithms, pushing the compound's servers to their limit. And then they found it. On a single, magnified frame where the imposter turned towards the camera, there was a faint, almost invisible distortion around his silhouette. A quantum shimmer. It was the exact same signature as the bomb. It was irrefutable, scientific proof. The figure in the video was not Bucky Barnes. It was a Skrull. They called the team to the briefing room. The mood was still heavy, but now there was a sliver of anticipation. Izuku and Peter presented their findings, showing the data, the matching signatures, the science behind it. A wave of relief washed over the room. Sam put a hand on Bucky's shoulder, squeezing it tightly. Wanda offered Bucky a small, genuine smile, her eyes filled with apology. "I'm sorry, Buck," she said softly. And for the first time, Izuku saw the ice in Bucky's eyes begin to thaw. He looked at Izuku and Peter. "Thanks," he said, the single word carrying a world of weight. "For not giving up." It should have been a moment of triumph. A moment where the team came back together, united against their enemy. But Izuku's mind was already taking the next logical step. "We cleared Bucky's name within this room," he said, his voice quelling the rising sense of relief. "But the world still thinks he's a terrorist. And there's a bigger problem." He pulled up another file on the holographic table. It was a SHIELD internal communications log. The doctored footage wasn't just given to the news networks, he explained, his voice grim. It was leaked to them. And the leak originated from a deeply encrypted, high-priority SHIELD server, the kind of server only a handful of people on the planet can access. He projected a list of names. It was short. Nick Fury, Maria Hill, a few other top-level intelligence directors, and the Avengers themselves. The leak came from inside our own secure network. The Skrulls didn't just create a lie, they had one of our own people deliver it for them. The relief in the room evaporated, replaced by a new, colder, more intimate paranoia. They had looked at Bucky with suspicion. Now, they had to look at their closest allies. Their handlers. Their friends. Fury, who had warned them this was coming. Hill, who had been with them from the beginning. They had cut out the first sprout of doubt, but in doing so, they had discovered that the roots of the poison ran deeper than they could have ever imagined. The team was together again, but the fractures in their trust had been sealed with the terrifying knowledge that one of the people they trusted most in the world was a traitor. The enemy wasn't just at the gates. They were already at the table. The Avengers compound had become a pressure cooker of suspicion, and the training room was where the steam escaped. It was meant to be a place to hone their skills, to perfect the seamless choreography of their teamwork. Instead, it had become a stage for their dysfunction. Simulation Protocol Zeta-7. Infiltrate and extract. Hostiles are armed, shape-shifting combatants. Go. Izuku's voice, flat and tired, echoed from the control booth overlooking the vast, reconfigurable training floor. Below, the team moved through a holographic cityscape of crumbling concrete and twisted rebar. The hostiles were advanced combat drones, projecting the flickering, unstable images of various SHIELD agents, then morphing into monstrous, four-armed aliens, then back to the face of a teammate. The simulation was designed by Izuku himself to be as psychologically jarring as possible. It was working too well. Sam, shield raised, hesitated for a fatal half-second when a drone wearing Maria Hill's face rounded a corner. "Hostile, 3 o'clock, Peter yelled, but the drone had already fired, a pulse of coherent light striking Sam's shield. In a real fight, the kinetic force would have sent him flying. Here, a blaring alarm signaled a critical hit. "Wilson, why did you hesitate?" Izuku's voice cut through the air, devoid of warmth. "I needed to confirm the target." Sam snapped back, his frustration palpable. On the other side of the floor, Bucky was a whirlwind of brutal efficiency. He wasn't working with the team. He was a lone wolf, systematically dismantling any drone that came near him, his movements economical and lethal. He ignored a call for cover from Peter, instead choosing to neutralize a drone that was flanking his own position. "Barnes, cover Parker's quadrant!" Izuku commanded. "Parker's quadrant is covered," Bucky replied, his voice a low growl, as he put a round through a drone's central processor. "By me." Wanda was the most concerning. She was holding back. Her power, which could have ended the simulation in seconds, was a faint crimson shield around her, a defensive measure. When a drone took the shape of Clint Barton, she flinched, her shield flickering. She was terrified of her own power, terrified of what would happen if she reached into a mind and found not a friend, but a monster. She was afraid of becoming an executioner based on a psychic guess. The simulation ended, as it had 3 times before, in catastrophic failure. The holographic city dissolved, leaving the 4 of them standing in the stark white grid of the training room, panting under the harsh lights. The silence was thick with resentment. "This isn't working," Sam said, throwing his shield onto a rack with a frustrated clang. "We can't function like this. We're second-guessing every shadow. Maybe if some of us weren't running their own private war, it would help." Peter muttered, pointedly not looking at Bucky. Bucky just glared back, his jaw tight. "I'm ending the threat. That's the mission. The mission is to do it together," Sam countered, his voice rising. Izuku watched from the booth, his hands clenched into fists on the console. He had failed. His strategies, his analysis, his carefully constructed simulations, they were all useless. He was trying to use logic to fix a problem of the soul. The Skrulls hadn't just infiltrated their agencies, they had infiltrated their instincts. They had weaponized the very concept of a familiar face. He dismissed the team without another word and retreated. He didn't go to the gym to punch his frustration into a reinforced heavy bag. He didn't go to the lab to seek a technological solution. He went to his room, a place that had become less of a sanctuary and more of a prison cell of his own design. The room was a testament to his spiraling obsession. Notebooks were everywhere. Not neatly stacked, but piled in chaotic drifts on his desk, his floor, his bed. Hero Analysis for the Future, volumes 28, 29, and 30 were already filled, their pages a frantic scrawl of crossed-out theories, paranoid flowcharts, and sketches of Skrulls morphing into his friends. He had analyzed every frame of the Geneva footage, every line of their failed mission's comms log, every piece of intelligence Fury had provided. He had run threat assessments on every known associate of the Avengers, from Pepper Potts to Happy Hogan. The result was always the same, a web of infinite possibilities, each one more terrifying than the last. His analytical mind, the cork of his brain that was as much a power as One for All, had become a tortured device. It showed him every possible seam, every potential betrayal, every way his family could be torn apart from the inside. He sank onto the floor amidst the sea of paper, his back against the leg of his desk. He felt a profound, bone-deep exhaustion that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. It was a crisis of faith in the one thing he had always trusted, his own mind. His entire life, he had believed that with enough analysis, enough observation, any problem could be solved. He had filled notebooks about his classmates' quirks, about pro-heroes' fighting styles, about villains' weaknesses. It was how he, a quirkless boy, had tried to level the playing field. It was how he, the inheritor of One for All, had learned to master a power that threatened to tear him apart. It was how he had earned his place on this team, in this world. He wasn't the strongest or the fastest. He was the one who saw the patterns, but there was no pattern here. There was only chaos. He looked up at the faded All Might poster on his wall. The hero's smile, once a source of boundless inspiration, now seemed to mock him. All Might was a symbol. He won by being an unshakable, indomitable force of nature. People didn't need to trust his plans, they just needed to trust him. His very presence was the solution. When All Might arrived, the fear vanished. When Izuku arrived, he brought flowcharts and probability analyses. He brought questions, not answers. And what about this world symbol? Steve Rogers. Izuku had spent weeks studying the historical records, the mission reports. Captain America was a commander. He stood on the battlefield and gave orders with a moral clarity that was absolute. He inspired loyalty through his unwavering certainty. Avengers, assemble! A simple, powerful command that united them, that focused them. Izuku's commands were complex, conditional. Sam, if Bucky draws their fire, and Wanda can maintain the perimeter, then Peter, your window is 3.7 seconds. His leadership was a delicate ecosystem of synergy and trust, and the Skrulls had salted the earth where that ecosystem grew. His leadership style, the very thing that defined him, had been turned into the team's greatest vulnerability. The enemy was attacking trust itself, and his entire methodology was built upon it. He was a general whose primary strategy had been rendered obsolete on the first day of the war. A wave of crushing inadequacy washed over him. He wasn't All Might. He wasn't Captain America. He was a nerdy, anxious kid from another dimension who was playing leader, and he was failing. He was going to get his friends killed. He picked up the nearest notebook, its pages filled with his own useless theories. A surge of raw, helpless anger, so foreign to his nature, coursed through him. With a choked cry of frustration, he hurled the notebook across the room. It slammed against the wall, its spine breaking, disgorging a flurry of loose pages that fluttered to the floor like dead leaves. He stared at the mess, his chest heaving. The quiet that followed was broken by a soft, almost hesitant voice from his doorway. This room looks like my head did after Westview. Izuku's head snapped up. Wanda Maximoff stood there, not in her combat gear, but in a simple sweater and jeans. She wasn't looking at him with pity or judgment. Her gaze was fixed on the scattered notebooks, her expression one of deep, painful understanding. He couldn't find the words to respond. He just stared, feeling exposed, ashamed of his outburst. She walked slowly into the room, her footsteps silent. She didn't try to clean up the mess. She simply sank to the floor a few feet away from him, pulling her knees to her chest. For a long moment, they just sat there in the shared wreckage of his confidence. I used to do that, she said, her voice a soft murmur. After everything. I would try to map it all out. Try to find the one moment, the one decision, that led to it all falling apart. I thought if I could just understand the logic of the collapse, I could reverse it. But there was no logic. It was just grief. Just chaos. She finally turned to look at him. Her eyes, which held galaxies of power and pain, were surprisingly gentle. You're trying to find a logical solution to an emotional problem, Izuku. You're trying to build a dam against the tidal wave of fear with pages and ink. It's my job, he croaked, his voice hoarse. To analyze. To strategize. But our strategy is based on trust. And they've taken that from us. How can I lead them if I can't even trust my own senses? If my own quirk is screaming at me that everyone is a threat, so you try to be like them? Wanda stated, not as a question, but as an observation. She gestured vaguely towards his All Might poster. The symbols. The unshakable men who never showed a moment of doubt. Izuku flinched, feeling as though she had just read the deepest, most insecure page of his thoughts. That's the mistake, she continued, a sad smile touching her lips. You think your strength is in being like them. But it's not. Their time was different. Their wars were different. They fought armies you could see. We are fighting a poison in the blood. An unshakable symbol can't fix this. A battlefield commander can't issue an order to make you trust the person next to you. She leaned forward slightly, her intensity drawing him in. Do you know why we followed you in Baltimore? Why Sam, a man who carries that shield, defers to your tactical command? Why Bucky, who trusts no one, follows your plans to the letter? Why Peter listens to you like an older brother he's always wanted? Izuku could only shake his head, a knot forming in his throat. Because you don't command us, Izuku, she said, her voice filled with a conviction that cut through his haze of self-doubt. You see us. When you look at me, You don't just see the Scarlet Witch, you see Wanda Maximoff. You see the power, yes, but you also see the grief, and the fear, and the girl who just wants a garden and a quiet cup of tea. You analyze our powers to make us effective, but you analyze our souls to keep us whole. She gestured to one of the scattered pages on the floor. He could see his own handwriting. Wanda, monitor emotional state pre- and post-mission. High-stress psychic environments cause feedback. Recommend post-mission sensory deprivation / calm down period in garden. Steve Rogers would have told me to control myself, Wanda said softly. All Might would have told me to be strong. You built me a garden and told me it was okay to need a moment of quiet. You see our faults, our fears, our cracks, and you don't see them as weaknesses to be eliminated. You see them as variables to be understood, to be protected. Her words were a balm on a wound he didn't even know was festering. He had always seen his obsessive analysis of people as a tactical tool, a means to an end. He never considered it might be the core of his leadership itself. I was so afraid of you when I first came here, she confessed, her gaze dropping to her hands, where a wisp of red smoke curled around her fingers. And of myself. I was a weapon, a walking, talking nuke that ran on grief. Most people here, even the kind ones, looked at me with a hint of fear in their eyes. But you looked at me with curiosity. You asked me questions, you wanted to understand. You weren't afraid of me. And because of that, you make me less afraid of myself. She looked up at him again, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Your strength isn't being unshakable, Izuku. It's the opposite. It's that you are shakeable. You feel doubt, and fear, and a crushing sense of responsibility. And because you feel it all, you understand it in others. That's not a weakness. In this war, against this enemy, that empathy, that sight, it's the only weapon we have left that they can't copy. Wanda's words settled over him, quieting the storm in his mind. She hadn't offered him a solution. She had offered him something far more valuable, a new perspective. He had been trying to fight the Skrulls on their terms, trying to plug the holes in the dam of trust. But Wanda was right. He couldn't stop the flood, so he would have to redirect it. A new thought began to form in his mind, not a frantic scrawl of paranoia, but a single, clear, sharp line of strategy. The Skrulls' greatest weapon was the doubt they created. They expected it to paralyze their enemies, to make them turn on each other. They expected the Avengers to shatter. What if they didn't? What if they leaned into the chaos? He looked at the mess of his notebooks, at the web of paranoid theories. He had been trying to find the truth hidden in the lies. But what if he stopped searching for the truth and started creating his own? What if he used the enemy's tactics against them? He stood up, a new energy coursing through him. The exhaustion was still there, but it was now overshadowed by a fierce, burning resolve. He looked at Wanda, who was watching him, a hopeful look on her face. Thank you, Wanda, he said, his voice stronger than it had been in days. I think you just gave me a new plan. He didn't start cleaning his room. He walked past the mess, a symbol of the strategy he was leaving behind. He went straight to the briefing room and summoned the team. They shuffled in, expecting another lecture, another failed debrief. They found Izuku standing before the holographic table, his posture different. The slump of defeat was gone. His green eyes, usually soft and analytical, now held a sharp, dangerous glint. Our previous strategies have failed, he began, his voice ringing with a newfound authority that made them all stand a little straighter. They have failed because we have been playing the enemy's game. We've been on the defensive, reacting to their moves, trying to mend the trust they break. We've been trying to play chess while they're setting fire to the board. He swept his hand across the table, and all the existing data, the Geneva footage, the mission logs, the threat assessments, vanished, replaced by a single, clean slate. So we stopped playing, he declared. From this moment on, we are no longer trying to figure out who is a Skrull. We are going to operate under a new assumption. We cannot and will not know. We will not trust our eyes. We will not trust our comms, unless they are confirmed with a real-time authentication code that I will change every hour. We will not even trust our own instincts. A murmur of confusion and protest went through the room. What are you saying, Izuku? Sam asked, his brow furrowed. How are we supposed to function? The Skrulls want us to doubt each other, Izuku explained, his gaze sweeping over each of them. They expect that doubt to paralyze us. So we will give them the opposite. We are going to show them a level of unity so absolute it becomes a weapon. From now on, you will follow my orders. Instantly, and without question. Even if they don't make sense. Even if they seem counterintuitive or suicidal. Even if the order comes from my voice but your eyes see a Skrull standing in front of you. He was asking for the impossible. He was asking for absolute, blind faith in the middle of a war built on absolute doubt. Each of you will be given compartmentalized objectives. You will only know your piece of the puzzle. You will not know the full plan. He continued, this way, even if one of us is compromised, the overall mission remains secure. The Skrull's greatest advantage is information. So we will become a black box. They can't predict a strategy that even the people executing it don't fully understand. It was a radical, terrifying gamble. He was taking their greatest weakness, their fractured trust, and turning it on its head. He wasn't asking them to trust each other. He was asking them all to place their trust, their lives, in one single point, him. He looked at them, at the doubt and fear warring with a desperate need for a solution in their eyes. He saw Sam's hesitation, Bucky's suspicion, Peter's anxiety, Wanda's cautious hope. They attacked our trust, he said, his voice dropping to a low, intense whisper. So we will forge a new one. Not out of friendship or history, but out of necessity. Out of survival. It will be a weapon, and we will aim it right at the heart of their invasion. He held their gazes, the analyst's burden on his shoulders heavier than ever before. But for the first time in a long time, he felt he could bear the weight. This is the only way we win. Are you with me? The sleek, sterile halls of the Avengers compound were a distant memory, replaced by the damp, metallic scent of a forgotten century. Their new home was a ghost, an abandoned SSR bunker nestled deep in the Catskill Mountains, a place so far off the grid it had fallen off the map. Concrete walls wept condensation, bare bulbs cast long, dancing shadows, and the only modern technology was what Peter Parker had painstakingly cobbled together from salvaged Stark tech and S.H.I.E.L.D. surplus. It was a tomb, but it was a secure tomb. This was the first tenet of Izuku Midoriya's new strategy: disappear. To fight an enemy that hid in plain sight, the Avengers had to become invisible. They were no longer a public-facing symbol of hope. They were a scalpel, poised to cut a cancer out of the world in the dark. This place smells of mothballs and post-war depression. A new voice, laced with a dry, sardonic Russian accent, remarked from the shadows of the bunker's main operations room. Very on brand for your little spy game. The team turned. Leaning against a rust-stained support column was a woman they hadn't summoned. She was dressed in practical black combat gear, her blonde hair tied back in a severe braid. On her hip was a holstered pistol, and strapped to her vest were an assortment of knives and what looked suspiciously like her signature. Widow's Bite. Bracelets. Yelena Belova looked them over with an air of detached amusement, her green eyes lingering on each of them for a moment. Captain? Ghost. Witch. Spider-Boy. And her gaze landed on Izuku, who stood before a bank of monitors, his expression unreadable. The new management. Fury sends his regards. And me, Fury sent you? Sam asked, taking a half-step forward, his hand instinctively moving towards the shield that was propped against a nearby table. He said your team needed someone who knows how to break things quietly, Yelena said, pushing off the column and walking into the meager light. And someone who isn't afraid to get her hands dirty. He also said you have a Skrull problem, which sounds messy. I like messy. She stopped in front of Izuku, tilting her head. She was a few inches shorter than him, but her presence was formidable. So you are the one who has them all playing follow the leader? The green boy from another world. You look very young to be so serious. Izuku didn't rise to the bait. He simply met her gaze, his own eyes calm and analytical. Our operational security is based on compartmentalization and need to know. Can you work like that? Yelena smirked. It is the only way I have ever worked. The Red Room was not big on team-building exercises. Good, Izuku said, turning back to the monitors. Because we have a target. The tension in the room was thick. The core team was still adjusting to Izuku's new, rigid command structure. Adding a wild card like Yelena, a former Black Widow with a fluid and lethal sense of morality, was like adding a lit match to a room full of dynamite. But Izuku had seen the logic in it instantly when Fury had briefed him on her arrival. Yelena was an outsider. She had no prior allegiances or emotional attachments within the team that could be exploited. She was a known quantity of unknown loyalties, which, paradoxically, made her the most trustworthy person in the room. She would follow the plan because she was a professional, not because of sentiment. Talos loyalists left one final breadcrumb before they went dark. Izuku explained, pulling up a satellite image of a sleek, glass and steel skyscraper in Washington, D.C. A single, encrypted data packet pointing to this building. It houses the headquarters of AmeriCorp Strategic Solutions, a high-level corporate lobbying firm. They have defense contracts, political connections, and according to Talos' source, they have a Skrull on their board of directors. A lobbyist. Bucky grunted from the corner where he was cleaning a rifle. Fitting. We're not going in to make a scene. Izuku continued, his voice crisp and authoritative. Our objective is twofold. First, we confirm the target's identity. Second, we capture him. Alive. We need intelligence, and we need to know how deep this cell goes. He turned, his eyes sweeping over the assembled team. This is the first field test of our new protocol. I will be the sole mission coordinator. Each of you will have a specific role. You will receive your instructions piecemeal. You will execute them without question. He looked directly at Yelena. Scalpel team will be you and Bucky. You're on infiltration. Your job is to get inside, get eyes on the target, and prepare him for extraction. A flicker of professional respect passed between Bucky and Yelena. They were two sides of the same coin, forged in different fires but made of the same tempered, deadly steel. They nodded in silent understanding. Overwatch will be Wanda and Peter. Izuku went on. You'll be stationed in a utility vent 2 blocks away. Peter, you are on digital warfare. I need you to bypass their network security, loop their cameras, and create a clean corridor for the infiltration team. Wanda, you are on psychic reconnaissance. I need you to be my canary in the coal mine. Listen for non-human thoughts, for psionic traps, for anything that feels wrong. Peter nodded eagerly, already tapping away at a custom-built deck. Wanda gave a more reserved nod, her expression one of intense focus. And you, little strategist? Yelena asked, a challenge in her tone. Where will you be? I'll be with the Overwatch team, Izuku replied. I will be your eyes and ears. I will see the whole board. And I will tell you how to move the pieces. The night was a blanket of oppressive humidity, the DC air thick and still. Inside the cramped, stuffy utility van, the only light came from the glow of a dozen monitors. Peter Parker, headset on, was a blur of motion, his fingers dancing across multiple keyboards. Lines of code scrolled down the screens, a digital waterfall of intrusion and counter-intrusion. Okay, their firewall is military grade, but it's a little arrogant. Peter muttered, more to himself than anyone. They left a legacy port open for their HVAC system. Amateurs. A few more keystrokes, and a schematic of the AmeriCorp building lit up on the main screen. I'm in. Security cameras are now watching a very boring loop of an empty hallway. You're clear for entry, Scalpel team. Izuku sat at the central command station, a headset identical to Peter's over his ears. He was watching everything. Biometric readouts for Bucky and Yelena. Thermal imaging of the building. Wanda's neurofeedback, which he had helped her calibrate to translate her psychic impressions into readable data. And a dozen other feeds. He was the central nervous system of the operation, processing a torrent of information. Scalpel team, confirm entry, he said, his voice calm and even. We're in. Bucky's low growl came through the comms. Moving through the west stairwell. It's clean, very clean. Yelena's voice added, a hint of dry humor in it. And the art in the lobby is terrible. A reason to hate them already. Izuku watched their 2 biometric dots move steadily up the building's schematic. They moved in perfect, silent unison, a pair of matched predators. Beside him, Wanda sat with her eyes closed, her hands resting on a console that monitored her brainwave activity. The lower floors are quiet, she whispered, her voice distant. Just the thoughts of a few late-night janitors. Worried about their families, the bills, human thoughts. She paused. But the top floor, the executive suites. It's different. It's loud. But guarded, like people shouting in a soundproof room. Stay with it, Izuku instructed gently. Don't push. Just listen. Bucky and Yelena reached the 44th floor, the executive level. Peter had already disabled the keypad on the access door. They slipped through into a hallway of plush carpets and expensive, soulless corporate art. We have eyes on the target's office, Yelena whispered. Marcus Thorne. Executive Vice President. Big corner office, big desk, big ego, I am guessing. Is he alone? Izuku asked. Negative, Bucky replied. He has a guest. They're talking. Can't make out what they're saying through the glass. Wanda's head tilted. They are not speaking in a language I know, she said, her brow furrowed. It's not verbal. It's direct. Conceptual. Images and intent. Alien. She opened her eyes, her pupils tinged with a faint red glow. They are both Skrulls, Izuku. Two of them. The mission parameters had just changed. This wasn't a simple snatch and grab anymore. New objective, Izuku said, his voice not betraying a hint of hesitation. The team had been drilled on this. No questions. Just execution. This is now a capture and containment mission. We're taking them both. Yelena, your priority is the guest. Bucky, you take Thorne. I want them alive, but incapacitated. Non-lethal takedowns if possible. On my mark. He analyzed the office layout on the schematic. 2 hostiles, both highly trained, if Talos reports were to be believed. A frontal assault was too risky. Peter, what's the lighting situation in that office? Izuku asked. It's on an independent circuit, but I can access it. I can kill the lights. Or make them into a strobe rave. Your call. Kill them, Izuku commanded. Bucky, Yelena, you'll have night vision. They won't. You'll have a 2-second window of disorientation. Use it. Ready. Yelena's voice was a purr of anticipation. On your mark, Bucky confirmed. Wanda, the moment they engage, I need you to create a low-level psychic disruption. Nothing overt. Just confusion. Make the responding security think the alarm is coming from the floor below. Understood, Wanda whispered, closing her eyes again. Izuku took a deep breath, the entire operation balanced on a knife's edge, on the absolute faith of his team in his commands. Execute. Now, in the utility van, a screen went black as Peter killed the power to the office. In his headset, Izuku heard the faint thump of Bucky and Yelena breaching the door. The next 30 seconds were a symphony of controlled violence heard only through the comms. There was the sound of a heavy thud, a gasp of surprise, the whisper of a thrown knife, a grunt of pain. Then, the sickening, wet crunch of Bucky's vibranium arm connecting with something solid. Thorne is down, Bucky reported, his breathing slightly elevated. Guest is feisty, Yelena grunted. There was the sound of a struggle, a sharp crack, and then a heavy fall. Okay. Guest is sleeping now. We have 2 packages, ready for delivery. Excellent work, Izuku said, a wave of relief washing over him. It had worked. The blind faith, the compartmentalization, it had worked. Begin exfiltration. You have 3 minutes until the building's emergency power reroutes around Peter's block. But as Bucky and Yelena began to move the unconscious Skrulls, a new alarm blared on Peter's monitor. Oh, Peter said, his voice tight. That's not good. They've got a failsafe. A biological one. The 2 Skrulls just went into cardiac arrest. Remotely triggered. What? Izuku demanded, his eyes wide. It's a biological kill switch, Peter yelped. If they're captured, their hearts just stop. I can't hack that. On his monitor, Izuku saw the biometric readouts for the 2 captives flatline. They had lost them. The entire mission was a failure. No. Not a failure. An adaptation. The Skrulls were trying to erase their trail. He wouldn't let them. His mind raced, processing the new variables. The bodies were now evidence. The enemy would be coming to retrieve or destroy them. This had just gone from a capture mission to a defensive one. Change of plans? Izuku said, his voice ice cold. They're burning their own assets. That means they're desperate. Peter, trigger the fire alarm for the entire building. Full evacuation. I want chaos. You got it, Peter said, typing furiously. Wanda, drop the psychic suggestion. Let security come. They'll add to the confusion. Bucky, Yelena, abort exfiltration. Barricade the office door. You are now on defensive lockdown. Hold that room until I say so. Hold the room? Yelena's voice was incredulous for the first time. Against what? The DC Police Department? Against whatever they send to clean this up, Izuku replied. And they will be sending someone. He watched the thermal sensors. The building was a flurry of activity as employees and security evacuated. But he was watching for the anomalies. The heat signatures that moved against the flow, and then he saw them. 3 figures, moving rapidly up the fire stairs, their thermal signatures slightly colder than a normal human's. They were moving with tactical precision. A Skrull cleanup crew. Scalpel team, you have 3 hostiles ascending the west stairwell. ETA 2 minutes. They're coming for the bodies. Let them come. Bucky's voice was a low rumble. This is not a fight you can win, Bucky, Izuku said calmly. Your new objective is escape and evasion. But you need a diversion. He looked at the building schematics, his eyes tracing the labyrinth of vents, pipes, and crawl spaces. He found what he was looking for, the main HVAC intake on the roof. Peter, can you give me control of the ventilation system for the 44th floor? Yeah, but why? Just do it, Izuku commanded. He took a deep breath, feeling the familiar warmth of one for all begin to course through him. He focused not on power, but on control. A small, dark wisp of energy, like a thread of smoke, materialized in his palm. Smokescreen. Daigoro Banjo's quirk. He had practiced this, creating small, concentrated clouds, learning to control their density and dispersal. He held his hand over a customized intake port Peter had rigged into their van's console, which was now patched into the AmeriCorp building's HVAC system. Bucky, Yelena, get to the north-facing window. On my signal, you are going out, Izuku ordered. Out the window? Yelena sounded both annoyed and intrigued. We are 44 floors up. Peter is dispatching a webline drone to your position. It will be there in 30 seconds, Izuku said. Now listen carefully. The moment the hostiles breach the door, I'm going to flood the entire floor with smoke. Your night vision won't work in it. But their senses will be useless. It will be total sensory deprivation. You will have exactly 10 seconds to get to the window and rappel down. It was a crazy, desperate plan, relying on split-second timing. He heard the cleanup team on the comms as they reached the office door. There was a loud bang as they used a breaching charge. Now, Izuku! Bucky yelled. Izuku plunged his hand into the intake port and unleashed smokescreen. He didn't create a gentle puff of smoke. He poured a controlled, concentrated stream of the thick, dark, supernatural vapor into the ventilation system. On his monitor, he saw the entire 44th floor on the thermal feed turn into a black, impenetrable void. Go! He yelled. He counted the seconds, his heart pounding in his chest. 1, 2, 3. He heard muffled shouts of confusion from the Skrulls on the comms. 7, 8, 9. We're out! We're on the line! Yelena's voice was breathless, laced with something that sounded like genuine surprise. Peter, get them out of there! The mission was a chaotic, improvised mess. They hadn't captured a live target, but they had confirmed a major infiltration hub, and more importantly, they had learned a critical piece of intel. The Skrulls were willing to sacrifice their own to maintain their secrecy. They were ruthless, and they were afraid of being exposed. And the team, they had held together. They had adapted to his insane, on-the-fly commands without a single question. Bucky and Yelena, 2 lone wolves, had worked as a perfect unit. Peter and Wanda had been his anchors. Blind faith had worked. Back in the cold damp of the SSR bunker, the mood was different. The earlier tension was gone, replaced by the humming energy of a successful, if chaotic, operation. They had their first prisoner, though he was long dead. Marcus Thorne's body lay on a medical table, a sheet covering his true, green-skinned face. "They're zealots," Bucky said, stripping and cleaning his sidearm. "A kill switch like that, that's not something a soldier has. That's for a true believer. It shows us their weakness," Izuku countered, looking at the body. "They're terrified of interrogation. Which means they have secrets they believe are worth dying for." Yelena, who had been observing Izuku since they got back, finally spoke. "Your plan was completely insane," she said, her tone matter-of-fact. "The smoke bombed through the air vents. It was a ridiculous, desperate gamble." She paused, then a slow, genuine smile spread across her face. "I am impressed." It was the highest praise she could offer. While Peter ran diagnostics on Thorne's confiscated phone and laptop, Yelena approached the body. "If he will not talk," she said, pulling on a pair of latex gloves, "maybe his body will." Izuku knew what was coming. It was necessary, but he didn't have to like it. He, Sam, and Peter moved to the ad hoc control room, watching through a security feed as Yelena and Bucky began a field autopsy. He had asked Wanda to stay out, to shield herself from it. It was Yelena who found it. Implanted beneath the Skrull's jaw, a tiny microdot containing a compressed data file, likely a dead man's switch meant to be retrieved by the cleanup crew. Peter decrypted it within an hour. It wasn't military plans or a list of agents. It was a manifesto. A recording. They gathered around the main monitor as the face of a Skrull appeared. He was handsome, charismatic, his eyes burning with a cold, righteous fire. He spoke in the Skrull language, but Peter's program provided a real-time translation at the bottom of the screen. "My brothers, my sisters, my true heirs," the Skrull began, his voice a powerful, resonant baritone. "For generations, we have been a scattered people. A homeless people. We have begged at the feet of Xandarians, pleaded with the Kree, and humbled ourselves before the denizens of 1,000 worlds, all for scraps. Talos and his followers would have us continue this way, to live as refugees forever, grateful for the pity of lesser species." His expression hardened. "I say no more. The universe owes us nothing. We will take what is ours by right of will. Look at this world. This earth. A jewel, a paradise of resources and life, and what have its custodians done with it? They poison their skies, they choke their oceans, and they slaughter each other over scraps of land and imagined gods. They are a chaotic, self-destructive disease, unworthy of the garden they inhabit." The camera zoomed in on his face, his eyes blazing. "Humanity's time is over. Their chaos will be replaced by our order. Their weakness by our strength. We will not be invaders. We will be inheritors. We are the Don Tolan. We are the cure. One Earth, one throne." The recording ended, leaving the team in stunned silence. This was Clar. They were not just fighting soldiers. They were fighting a crusade. "He believes every word of that," Sam said, his voice heavy. Izuku stared at the frozen image of Clar. He finally understood. This wasn't a war for territory. It was a war of ideology. And Clar's philosophy was a dark mirror of everything a hero stood for. He promised salvation through domination, peace through erasure. The whispers in the dark had finally given their enemy a face and a voice. And Izuku Midoriya, the boy who had always wanted to save everyone, now knew that he was facing an enemy who believed, with every fiber of his being, that humanity was not worth saving at all.